Good afternoon, everyone. Early in the season, everybody's glad to see each other, and I'm delighted to see you all. Welcome to this seminar today. I'm very, very pleased to be welcoming Jay Sankaran, and he's got a fascinating presentation for us today. Jaganath Jay is an associate professor in the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin, and a non-resident fellow in the Foreign Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. He works on problems at the intersection of international security and science and technology, which gives me a great deal of pleasure because I absolutely love to wrestle with these same kinds of issues, but I do it from the direction of a policymaker, not an actual scientist. So I'm really delighted we have Jay with us today. He's been working quite a bit recently on the impact of emerging technological advances on international politics, war, and nuclear weapons doctrine, and that is what we will focus on today. I don't want to read his entire biography. You have it with the announcement of this event, but it's really a stunning career he's had since he started his work as a scientist in the Indian Missile Complex. So I'm very glad we have you now at Texas. So welcome, Jay. By the way, I should have introduced myself for those online. I am Rose Gadamuller. I'm the William J. Perry Lecturer here at the Center for International Security and Cooperation. I'm looking forward to sharing our discussion today. So without further ado, Jay, over to you. And for those here in the room, we'll open up the discussion after Jay's briefing with first, we always give first dibs to our fellows. So be thinking about your questions before we turn to others in the audience. And also for those online, I will be monitoring and look forward to answering as many of your questions also as we can. So Jay,
all right,
the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Rose. And it's fantastic to be back here again at CSAC to workshop some of my ongoing research. I'd have to say, this never gets easy. It's always scary when you're giving a talk. When I'm looking at the student, I'm going, boy, did I make a challenging task on my plate, right? So anyway, I'm looking forward to it. I'd like to receive feedback on this part of the work. So how much is enough? How much is enough for nuclear deterrence? That is the question I'm asking. What I'm going to do for the next 30 minutes is three distinct things. I am going to quickly survey the theoretical framework for nuclear deterrence as it's understood. I'm going to frame the theory of nuclear revolution quickly. And then I'm going to then, secondly, talk about the relevance of the concept of assured destruction. Right? I'm going to say why it's important for the theory of nuclear revolution. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about definitions, measurements of assured destruction, how it's done, what are its limitations. And then the third part is when I'm going to say, well, what does it require to do assured destruction now? I'm going to give you a number, and then I'm going to tell you how I got at that number. And then I'm going to close. We'll have a conversation. Okay, there you go. At its core, one can make a simplistic assumption that this is how deterrence works. Deterrence theory says that deterrence works. State A will be deterred if its probability of accomplishing a military action multiplied by the benefits is less than the targeted state, state B retaliating, multiplied by its cost. At its core, this is the model. Now, nuclear deterrence theory kind of flips that entire story, right? Nuclear deterrence theory says none of these other variables matter. Only one thing matters. What is the probability that a state B can retaliate? That is the only thing that matters. It says, oh, costs don't matter, because when the probability of retaliation exists, the cost is already at a assured destruction level, which imposes an intolerable punishment. So you don't actually have to measure the cost because nuclear weapons are so powerful, right? It says, well, it really doesn't matter what the other stronger state does either. Nuclear revolution theory says, even if you're a weak state, you don't have the best army or the best navy or the air force, you can still deter as long as you have a probability of retaliating. Because it's revolutionary, the weapons are so powerful, you just have to acquire the means to deliver it to your adversary. And that is measured by this term, assured destruction. Okay. So what is assured destruction? And I'm happy to report, after spending 7 months going through all this scholarly literature, that nobody really knows, right? We all, there is this nice paper by a sociologist, the political scientist in the room, we know, I think it's Healy, right? It's like wine, it's full-bodied, it's full of flavor, it's defined in connoisseurship. Assured destruction is something like this. We all assume it exists, but we don't have a great metric for it. And I will also say, neither do I. Because it's very tough. There is no distinct way to define and measure it. But there is one benchmark in the history of nuclear weapons that most scholars refer back to, and that is Secretary McNamara's work in the 65. So you can debate about the benchmark, which we will, and I will tell you some context for that debate. But this is, in fact, the most used benchmark. Okay. Secretary McNamara himself has different variations of this, beginning from 63 all the way to 70, maybe even up to 72 when he had his books. Again, it kind of changes, but I like this definition slash measurement benchmark. So I'm going to use this. This was before a House Armed Services Committee. He was testifying, and he says 3 things. The first thing I think is really important, which goes to the point I said, the kind and amount of destruction cannot be precise. In other words, assured destruction is notional. We cannot be exact. But then he goes down to say, but for our planning purposes, it has to be 20% of Soviet Union's population. I have to kill 20% of Soviet Union's population. I have to take out 50% of Soviet Union's industry. If I do that, it will eliminate as a major power the Soviet Union for many years, and it would be intolerable punishment to any industrialized nation. That's how he says. Now, all of these terms can be contested, but I am not going to. I'm going to use this framework, but this is the framework McNamara puts out. And if you go back to all the principal texts, to Jervis and back to Schelling, kind of this is behind what people talk about. This measurement metric is what is behind when people talk about assured destruction. Okay? So is this the ideal metric? Again, the answer is no. In fact, if you go back to the history and trace how McNamara came to those numbers, it was not driven by an analysis motivated to define and measure assured destruction. It was driven by bureaucratic bargaining. The Air Force wanted 1,400 Minuteman missiles. So McNamara said, I don't want to give you that much, I'll give you 1,000. And the reason he said, I'll give you 1,000 is after 1,000 warheads are delivered into the Soviet Union, every additional warhead would have so little marginal returns in damage that between 1,000 to 1,400, the industrial destruction would go from 51% to 54%. I can't blow anything up. That was the limit. But I can't meaningfully blow anything up. That's the limit. And that limit is what these numbers are. So this is the ceiling for assured destruction. It's not the mid-level. It's not the flow. At least at that point in time, this was the ceiling for assured destruction. Right? Doing anything more than this did not make economic sense, did not make military sense. Therefore, you don't need more missiles. Okay? So that is assured destruction. I will rely on this. Not completely, but to a large extent. All right. Okay. And then there is a range of memos and analysis that goes at that time, both at the DoD and then other staff. And at one point, they try and see, well, what do I need to get to this point? Again, there are several analyses, but the one I'm going to use is this particular statement from a draft presidential memorandum that Secretary McNamara wrote to President Johnson. So 700 weapons, 1,200 megatons, delivered on 335 distinct targets, designated ground zeros, would kill 115 million people. I think that was roughly 24% or maybe something like that, and 57% of Soviet industrial floor space. Okay, so there is the number you need, right? 1,200 megatons. That's the point for shoe destruction. That's the point where the nuclear revolution theory holds. Okay. So what do I need now? That's the whole point of the paper. I want to go back and see what do we need now. The world is different. I'm going to argue this is what we need. 2% of what we needed in 1965 or 1967. Right? It's no longer 1,200, it's 26.3 megatons. What I'm going to do for the rest of my talk is going to tell you why I think it is 26.3 megatons. The answer is, in a one word, it's technology. Right? It's always technology. You know, this is technology's thing, right? But it is in many ways different aspects of the impact of technology. Yes, our missiles have gotten more better. It's gotten more accurate. Right? I believe the numbers I had in my paper was when the Soviets were building missiles in 1965, their accuracy was 10 kilometers. I believe now it's 250 meters. So our missiles are really accurate. And this is a nice point to keep in mind. When the accuracy doubles, yield can be reduced by 8. Rule of thumb. So we don't need all those big megatons. Our missiles are very accurate. There are burst compensating fuses. There is a retargeting. All of those go into it, but that's not the real story behind how I got this number. Technology is doing something else. And to tell you what that is, I need to do two things. I'm going to talk a little bit about network theory, and I'm going to talk a little bit about self-organized criticality theory. It won't be too theoretical, but the concepts really do a lot of work. And I'm going to lay that out and tell you how the evolution of technology is made the industrial infrastructure of modern nation states highly vulnerable. Okay? So network theory. Am I missing a slide? Yes, something is missing. Okay. I'll run a little bit. All right. And I'm going to talk about SANs as well. Okay. What you should see here, and maybe this is the transition between a Windows to a Mac, something like that. There you go, right? It kills you all the time. Great. So I wish I had a whiteboard. I could do this, but we can also think through this. This is not complicated. So network theory has a whole bunch of stuff, but it says two things. There are two kinds of networks, homogeneous, heterogeneous. Okay. Remember dots and lines, right? A homogeneous network is like 50 dots. Each dot would be connected to every other dot with the same number of links. It's just nice even lines going on a dotted a set of dots. Now, heterogeneous network is slightly different. Some nodes are more connected than other nodes, meaning there's one big dot that has a whole bunch of lines going to everything else, and everything else has small connections. Okay? Why is this important? Why do I care about all of this? And this phenomenon of heterogeneity in networks is being observed across a spectrum of events, but it's also seen in our critical national infrastructure. Right? That's the point I'm trying to make here. So this is a network diagram of air traffic in the United States. So Atlanta is really big. Now, I spent a year at Montgomery at the Air War College. Right? Montgomery is like two hours away from Atlanta. So there is this invisible dot somewhere around here, right? In a homogeneous network, the airport at Montgomery should be as important as the airport at Atlanta. But hey, it's not, right? Atlanta is big. And the reason it's big is because our infrastructures are driven by two things, right? Profit maximization and functional efficiency. Profit maximization, functional efficiency means our infrastructures are set up to be heterogeneous. So some nodes are really big, which means they're really fat targets for a nuclear strike. If I want to have one warhead and I want to choose between Atlanta Airport and Montgomery, if I was sitting in Russia, I'd say Atlanta Airport, right? And that's the relevance for network theory. This is not just airports. It permeates across infrastructure. I will show you that it's true in seaports, it's true in petroleum processing, it's true in natural gas plants, it's true in industries. The level of heterogeneity may slightly vary, but this phenomena is across industries, across nation states, because that's the best way to maximize profit and deliver services. Okay, so we have all these nice big targets and red dots that are naturally set up because of the way we function as a state. And then I have to do one more thing. I have to talk about self-organized criticality. Okay. And then I have to talk about SAND, because that's the best way to talk about self-organized criticality. What do I mean here? Remember, there are two things happening. We have big fat targets, and I'm going to say one more thing about the target system, and I have to talk about SAND to do that. Okay. Self-organized criticality theory says one simple thing. Complex systems, whether they are occurring in nature, whether they are man-made, or whether they are engineered, slowly organized, self-organized to a critical state. Now, this insight did not exist in 65. This is 1990s post-network analysis theory building. So in the 1990s, late 1980s, people were studying about why do catastrophic failures happen, and there was two bodies of scholarship. The normal accidents theory, which was the basis for Scott Sagan's book, and then post-normal accidents theory, people were trying to explain, but what is this criticality? Where does it come from? Can it be fixed? And that is this body of work by physicists that examine this using a lot of things, but I like the SAND. Why SAND? What does SAND explain? So people, when they were trying to develop an empirical basis for self-organized criticality, wanted a law, right? They didn't get a law, but they got a theory. And the way they studied the theory using multiple phenomena, but by SAND, was like this. Drop a grain of sand on a flat plate, keep dropping it until a triangle forms. There's a pile, right? So at some point in the pile, you're going to get small avalanches, right? Because the sand is not a fixed structure. Gravity is working on it. There are other phenomena. There's a small avalanche, little bit of the sand slides down. That's a small shock to the system, right? That happens often. Remember, sand is constantly falling on this pile, small avalanches, the sand goes off, the system is stable, it starts piling up again over time, multiple small avalanches, but constantly the slope is building in the sand, right? You can YouTube it, by the way. I didn't want to build a YouTube link, but you can YouTube it. So sand gets, the slope is narrow, it gets shallow, 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 and then you have, boom, one large avalanche that drops the entire pile back to almost its flat structure, right? And they have done this multiple times in multiple variants. It's been observed. What they were hoping, and these were all physicists trying to understand the phenomena of catastrophic failure, right? They could not get a law, but they could get a pattern. The pattern was power law. Small failures happen more often. Large failures happen much less often, but they do happen. You cannot get away from it. They looked, and this has been again repeatedly demonstrated in tectonic plate movements. The big earthquake is always followed by several small earthquakes. It's observed in cosmology, it's observed in national economies, and it's also observed in industrial infrastructure. Okay, so the phenomena self-organized theory says one simple thing, that system failure is power law distributed. The high cost failures have low probability. The low cost consequence failure has high probability. Hey, that's all good. What does it mean for my argument? What does it mean for national infrastructure? There you go. So people have captured this data quite often, but the one that is more robust is the failure of the North American power transmission grid, right? We have power failures all the time. Some of them are big, some of them are small, some of them are really nasty, right? When the nature has hitting hard. Okay, so the phenomena exists broadly, but it exists in critical infrastructures. And what we have done as a modern nation state in the industrial infrastructure is again designed to deliver service quickly with profit maximization as the goal. So we are really good at defending against the low cost, high probability failures. We spend a lot of time trying to prevent the failures that happen every 2 months. We spend money to defend against it. We don't touch this. We don't spend money to defend against the high cost, low probability failure. If it's going to happen every 50 years, we don't put money into it, right? And again, in my paper, I give you a whole host of reasons why we don't do it, but we don't do it because it's too much money for a threat that is too far away. Right? What that means for my argument is this: because we don't defend against this probability, the high cost, extremely painful, but rare event, we have no redundancy or no surge capacity in our industrial infrastructure. So I made 2 points here. Our industrial infrastructure is highly heterogeneous. There are big fat targets. We don't defend against the high cost, low probability failures. So our big fat targets, if they go away, we don't have the capacity to back it up. 2 big things. Those are the reasons why my number of 26.2 comes in, right? Network is highly concentrated, big fat targets. You take them out, there is no way to buffer. It was a little better in the 60s. It's all gone. It is not how it's done now. Now, those two, if you put together, is how I get my number. Okay. Remember, highly concentrated heterogeneity, no redundancy. So the heterogeneity is kind of what happens here. I'm trying to see how many of the facilities in each category contribute to 50% of capacity. This is the United States data. This is all open source. Google, right? Don't go chat GPT, it just messes you up. Google, right? I mean, it's good. So ports, there are 94 American ports that engage in foreign tonnage, export, import. 7 of those ports contribute to 50% of the revenue. 94 exist, only 7 contribute to 50% of the revenue. Okay. Same for domestic tonnage. Petroleum refineries, we have 128 petroleum refineries. 24 or roughly 18% contribute for 50% of the capacity for petroleum refining. Same story in natural gas processing plants. And this repeats again and again. So this is heterogeneity showing its head across the spectrum, right? So that's how I get to the number that I got to. So here are all the elements I targeted. The 105 are my industrial targets that I want to target, or I assume a Soviet nuclear war planner would target to get to the 50% of industrial destruction. So airports are, seaports is my first category. These seaports I put up there, the 18 total designated ground zeros are the ones that are in combination responsible for 50% of export-import revenue and 50% of domestic trade in goods. Okay. This is all out there. Why airports? Those airports are not big for passengers. Those airports are really big for, again, export-import. Roughly 45% of US export-import income is earned through air traffic, not essentially everything is done through seaports. So these 6 airports are the huge hub for export-import travel through, export-import trade through airspace. So those are the 6. Petroleum refineries 22, natural gas processing plants 55. They all meet the 50% threshold. 50% of those capacity would be taken out by these targets. And I chose petroleum and natural gas because they are not just primary targets, they also feed into industrial end users. So 75% of industrial productivity in the US is reliant on petroleum and natural gas. Okay? So those are my industry targets. And this is the point where I said, well, is this good enough? Right? And I thought, well, no, we have to go to McNamara's criteria, right? Because we don't have a better one. We have to work with that. So those are the industry targets. These are the population targets, right? How did I choose it? The Bureau of Economic Affairs ranks each city by its contribution to GDP. And surprise, surprise, it's still heterogeneous. These 18 cities or 18 metropolitan statistical areas would contribute 50% of GDP from cities to the national GDP. So the names won't be surprising. New York, Dallas, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Baltimore. Well, you guys get one in San Francisco. So you will have one 800 kiloton warhead. So all the big 18 cities, where the other 18 targets I had, in total, that brings my number to 119 designated ground zeros. McNamara had 335, but the yield changes substantially because all my industry targets can now be hit by 100 kiloton warheads. In the 65, the lowest warhead payload we had was, I believe, 1.2 megaton. So 100 into 105, and then 18 into 800 kiloton warheads, that would come roughly to 26.2 megatons. And that is my number. So to give a little bit more context, if the 100 kiloton warheads would be roughly 10% of the warheads in deployed Russian SLBM force. The Russians have approximately close to 1,100 kiloton deployed submarine-launched ballistic missile warheads deployed. This would require roughly 10% of that for the industrial targets. Now, the 800 kiloton, because they are population targets, and population targets are meant to kill people, that would be approximately 5.3% of the 800 kiloton warheads the Russians deploy on their SS-18, or 2.5% of their deployed ICBM warheads. Those are not big numbers. If you look at the evolution of warheads over time, we are now probably at the lowest point. We're all worried if it's going up, but even at this lowest point, to get to the numbers I want to, it's not a huge demand for the Soviets. And it should not be for the Chinese in a few years. Okay, so that's the number. That's my 26.2. And I'm going to do one more thing before I stop. The question I asked was, well, this is all good, right? I went up, I matched McNamara's data, I tried my analysis to figure out what I need to do in contemporary state, and I have this number. But what does that number mean for the US economy was one of the questions I was trying to answer. And there were multiple rabbit holes I had to go, right, with my fluffy white tail coming out, but there is a methodology to do it. To understand what this would mean, if I hit these 105 plus 18 targets, what it would conceptually mean for us. Okay, so what is all this? I give you the Bureau of Economic Affairs data input-output models for the US economy. So if you go to the Bureau of Economic Affairs, go to a page and search for input-output tables, it will tell you, it'll give you two tables. Those two tables will tell you every transaction in every industry in the United States for every year. It's called the input-output tables. It's called the make table and the use table. The make table will say which commodity each industry produced. The use table will say which commodity each industry used, what was sent for exports, what was sent for final consumption, and you put it all together, you get a map of the US economy. Oh, I'm sorry, that's too small. I tried to give you a little bit of framing here. So it's a lot of data, but at its core, it's a snapshot of the US economy. And input-output models have been used since World War II to predict the effect of bombing campaigns. There's a long history. There's a long debated history, no doubt, but there's a long history to do it. So I took this data and I said, well, if this was, so the data I used was 2023 US economy. That's the last one they had. The Bureau of Economic Affairs has two sets. The annual data is 71 by 71 industries, big industries. Every 5 years, they do 471 by 471. Right? I want to spare myself the pain, so I took the annual data and I said, let's do 71. But it is still the US economy as aggregated scale. Okay. So the the data can be translated into something. Everything that's produced is either consumed by another industry or it's consumed in the final demand, which is majorly two components, export or its domestic consumption. If the industry doesn't consume it, we as consumers use it. Right? That's what happens in petroleum, and then we export some stuff, right? So that's the model. So if my targeting is right, it should do one thing. It should drastically reduce final demand. I just blew up 50% of ports. I blew up 50% of refineries and natural gas processing plants. So I should at least assume 50% of the exports of petroleum and natural gas is not happening. I assumed that. I think it's a fair assumption. Then I parametrically varied consumption in all the other goods, right? If there is no petroleum, I'm assuming there's no transportation. So that's going to change, right? So I did two things. I took the 2023 US economy and I ran a counterfactual. The counterfactual is this: spontaneously 50% of export import or final demand, export import plus consumption in oil and natural gas goes down by 50%. Everything else is parametrically varied. What happens to the US economy? So conceptually, two things happen. Because it's a counterfactual to the 2023 economy, if the demand goes down, production should go down because industries won't buy as much because the demand has gone down. So demand goes down, production goes down, output goes down, the economy is altered, right? It's an experiment, it's an experimental model, it's a counterfactual, but I want to see where that would lead us to. There you go, that's where it led me to. So 50% reduction for petroleum and natural gas, and then parametric variation on everything else, right? Like industrial output, rubber output, air transportation, pipeline transportation. It's empirically tough to say where we are, but I argue that we should at least be at a 30% range because everything else will get affected. So if those two go by 30%, relatively speaking, how much loss would the economy or the industrial output of the US economy as seen in 2023 would suffer? So it's 10 power 6 in millions of dollars. I believe the term is quadrillion. I had checked, but it's roughly 2.63 quadrillion is the hit. As a percentage, it would be a 54.3% reduction in industrial output. Now, you want to know how bad that is? The last time that happened was the Great Depression. I think that's our sheer destruction. I'll stop with that and I'll take your questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Jay. I said to our audience here, excellent and frightening. I already have a good question in our Q&A. For those of you online, please post questions in the Q&A function. I know Herb has a question, but among the fellows' questions, please go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, sir. Austin Gruber, CSAC visiting scholar with the Air Force. One of my questions is it's related to your 26.2 number there. So with the network theory and heterogeneous networks, the calculations look like it was based on population and industry separately. So is that accounted for the heterogeneous relationship between industries and populations in the calculation where you'd have major population centers near industrial bases, or were they accounted for separately to have a more conservative estimate?
They were done separately. I think it was more to do with the ease of analysis than a conservative, but it turns out to be conservative.
Thank you.
Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Kevin Bustamante, I'm a postdoc here at CSAC. So I have a clarification question, then a related question to that. So the first clarification point is, you start off by saying McNamara says we needed 1,200 megatons to destroy the Soviets. But the rest of the analysis is showing, here's what enemies need to destroy the United States.
Huh?
So I guess I'm struggling to see the comparison here. Like, shouldn't the analysis be, here's what the United States needs to destroy Russia today?
No, it's not. I don't know what we need to destroy today. I have to do a separate analysis and separate data set, right? So there's two answers for that. So it doesn't matter what was the number in 65, it was always higher. I haven't seen a clear number on what the Soviets would require to strike the US. I think it some point it was 410 megaton warheads, but there was only one point and I was not too convinced. So that data doesn't exist. The other reason for focusing on the US was we could imagine the Russians doing it, or I could imagine from a publication perspective that someone says, oh, we would never do it. That's not a strategy, right? But most people would say, well, maybe the Russians would do it. And so that I had to choose whether it's the Russians doing to the US or the US doing to Russians. And I thought it was more plausibly defendable to assume that the Russians are doing to the US. I'm not saying it's the only way to look at it, but that's how I proceed.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the point that I'm sort of making here is I don't know what the baseline is. Like, if it's the 26 number today, I don't know what it was in the past. And so like, I don't know what I'm comparing.
Oh, it'd be very close to the 1200. I mean, the technology is the same. And for the one thing we know from the 60s is the Soviets were more spread out. So it may be slightly lower, but the megatonnage and the accuracies were the same. So it's not going to change. It's 1200, maybe it's 1100. That is my instinct. So that comparison metric does not change. It's not going to be 28 in 1965.
Yeah, I just to follow up a little on that, I was sitting here thinking about, it's compelling your argument about the network theory and the heterogeneous nature of the network. Russian Federation, China today, can we make the same argument about the heterogeneous nature of their economic structures? I don't know.
From the search I did, it is. Chinese certainly, to some extent, because I was looking at the Russian oil and gas and the way Ukrainians were targeting, and it had a very heterogeneous structure. Is it true across the industry and, you know, in every case? I don't know, because the heterogeneity itself has a coefficient, and the coefficient can change. But in general, if the idea is to deliver services at the lower cost, you have to go heterogeneous. But China, certainly, yes. I looked at some of those data. And Rand did a study very similar like this in the 90s. I think Roger Molander had a study or unpublished study. My understanding was the same principle holds.
Berlin.
Thanks. Herb Lin, CSAC, Emerging Technologies and Security. Fascinating talk. I was wondering if the implications of your analysis have anything that could have any relevance to the question of whether you could do assured destruction with non-nuclear weapons. Perhaps biological weapons, I don't know, but not. Let's start out with conventional and then move on to, you know, more exotic stuff like cyber, or more importantly, like bio.
I have to do the math, right? So I'm going to be careful. For the industry, not for cities size targets, right? I mean, the 800
Not population, it's hard to,
right.
Well, the bio can do.
But so industry, conceivably, petroleum refineries are point targets, precise targets. But I would say it's conceivable, but then one would have to think about the probability of kill. For nukes, if you strike, I can assume there's a probability of kill because the 20 psi overpressure is roughly huge that you can't get out of it. For conventional, I would think that gets very complicated. Then how many conventional weapons? One could, in principle, certainly do it. I'm not saying it's not conceivable. So 2 cruise missiles or 4 cruise missiles smartly placed could disable a petroleum refinery for a long period of time. But my guess is still a nuclear weapon is having a higher probability of assured destruction of the facility. One could then come up and say, well, what if I bring it back in 6 months? If it's a nuclear weapon, you're not going to bring it back in 6 months. It's a radiating dust pile. I mean, well, you could, but I wouldn't buy it. But for cruise missiles, people can make that argument. So in principle, I think the substitution would exist. I don't know to what extent that would be convincing for someone who's very critical of the claims I am making. If I said, you know, you can do it.
But actually, I'm more thinking of the Russians who would be worried that the U.S. advantages in conventional weapons could, in fact, do an assured destruction mission without, or with far less reliance on nukes.
I think people have made the case. I would be skeptical. I would look at the data. I'm not saying it can't be done. I haven't seen it, but people have made the case. I will admit that. I've seen the arguments being made.
Thank you.
I'm going to go online because we have several interesting questions here, two interconnected ones. Mark Goodman asks, how do you reconcile an industrial targeting strategy with the laws of war, which seem to require counterforce targeting?
Mhm.
And how do you respond to arguments for counterforce targeting as a damage limitation strategy? Damon Coletta's question kind of feeds into that. When he asks, he says, thank you, Jay. Did Strategic Air Command not apply network theory when building the MAD area PSYOP? How did they justify such large megatonnage during the bureaucratic battles? And, related then back to Mark's question, could your 26.2 number be boosted using arguments about risk reduction or maximizing probability of destruction? So what about counterforce? Is that going to help us out?
Hey, so one argument I make, and I'm comfortable making, is I'm not saying this is the magic number we need. This is not one would have to do a little bit more to understand the arsenal requirements. But one thing I can argue very confidently with this work is damage limitation doesn't matter. I mean, I'm talking, I think I read the numbers, 5.3% of warhead and 10% of warheads, missile defenses are not there. I mean, so you can try damage limitation, but I'm saying damage limitation won't stop you from reaching the benchmark of assured destruction or prevent the other side from getting to the benchmark of assured destruction. I think the other question, but so what good is counterforce? If they're required to deliver 80% of their warheads, and if you have counterforce, then you can have a competitive dilemma here. But if the percentage is 10% and you have counterforce, and in principle they have launch on warning, which means the moment you try to do something, they will fire a whole bunch of their warheads. I don't find counterforce preventing assured destruction. Now, would it be a bargaining tactic? Would it do other things? Conceivably, and I have to go back and study those. I have not in this paper. The only thing I'm saying is you can have counterforce, but you cannot deny assured destruction. There was some question about network theory and strategic air command. My guess is no, because network theory emerged in the, again, early 80s. Self-organized criticality as a phenomena emerged in the early 90s. I mean, it didn't exist. The insights didn't exist. I mean, McNamara folks did a lot of analysis. Is it Glenn Kent, I think, the Air Force general who did a lot of this? Right. I mean, there's a classified 100-page report on how they did the math. I mean, they were very systematic. The insights didn't exist. Why the Air Force wanted more? I mean, all bureaucracies want more. It shouldn't be surprising. I mean,
and they had to buy some bombers and some ICBMs
combination. Yeah. In fact, there's a nice story about. So Glenn Kent is this Air Force general who is a student of Schelling's for a short while. Goes to Pentagon. He's really smart. He can do math. So McNamara really likes him, and then he comes up in the office of DDR&E, I think, right?
R&E,
yes, right. So, and so he gets pulled in, and so he does this analysis. At one point, the Air Force general at that point, oh, I'm missing a name here, the guy who wanted more bombs, right? I mean,
everyone.
No, this one's, he was special. He wanted more of everything, really big one. Yes, Curtis LeMay. He says, well, you know what? He holds a meeting after Glenn Kent does this analysis and says, I'm going to demote you for doing this. I mean, it's on record. So again, and that's true for all bureaucracies. They are highly conservative. And there was an argument to be made. They were talking about probabilities and I'm not characterizing it in a trivial fashion, but they wanted more. I want more salary, so right? I mean, it's just the way it is. Did I miss anything?
No, let's go on. Anna Furl.
Yeah, hi, I'm Anna Furl. I'm a postdoc here at CSAC too. I think my question goes a little bit into the direction that the previous people asked. So what are like the broader political consequences of your findings? So I mean, if it's such a reduction in, what is needed to actually create assured destruction, what can be done about it in a way?
I think the one thing I had to still write on the conclusion of the paper because I'm trialing it out, say, There is a debate on damage limitation. Right? Oh, should we do this with China? The one thing I will say strongly is don't go there. Right? Because if this is how low it's required, there's two things happening. The one thing I didn't talk about in the paper is countries think they are more vulnerable than they are, and they are under more threat than they usually are, especially in a crisis. And if you go to some of the ways in which both the US and the Soviet Union did the launch on warning posture, if I'm saying that 20% is what you need to do, so you can lose 80% in principle, but the moment you lose the first 20%, countries want to launch. So it's the Pareto principle flip both ways. You need 20%, but you're going to launch full on when you lose 20%. And that, I don't think, is a problem that's going to go away. Countries always worry about their vulnerabilities. And if you do damage limitation and it becomes very explicitly threatening, then one way countries are just by posture, the other is by building up. So I think that argument I will very strongly push in this paper is there is a real cost. If you put countries under stress, they will take very risky postures. And if it requires just 15 to 20% to do this level of damage, and remember, this is the ceiling in my framing. Half of this is not good. It's, at 25%, you're not going to have a fun time. Right? So the problem, the countries will tend to go. So I think that is one big, it's theory relevant, it's policy relevant. We need to think about that. It also has implications for arsenal size. Now, to get 26.2 megahertz, you may need a lot more. It depends on what the other side's doing and the military tactics and all that, which, again, Glenn Kent's report is fantastic. Right? It's 55 years and still the benchmark for how to do this. But we are in the middle of a debate about the 3-tier problem. Right? Do we need to double our arsenal? If my analysis is correct to some extent, I don't think we need to double. We may have to think about it, but it's not a lot to ensure assured destruction, which is still the core of deterrence. So the argument that we need to double, I would gently push back on that, because that is 2 more analysis away. So I think those are 2 insights useful to put forward, which I will. My conclusion needs to be written out.
Very interesting. All right. We have a somewhat mischievous question from an anonymous questioner online. Would defending against this destruction look like more preparation for a high-cost, low-probability disaster? So is Golden Dome preparation for a high-cost, low-probability disaster?
I don't think so. So I've done missile defenses for a long time. Those are right. So one thing I would say, if you read the nuclear revolution theory, right, I mean, it's a theory, it's not a law. And the one variable people always acknowledge that's going to make it reverse the revolution is missile defense. In principle, there is nothing in science that precludes this fantastic shield. Right? In practice, we have not gotten there. And I think a lot of that is because bureaucratically, we are just not focused on it. I mean, I think we can do a lot better than we do because, and I can talk about it, but no, I don't think there is in the near future any clear sign that we can defend against this rate of assured destruction. And remember, the other side's reacting to do, if you do missile defenses, they are going to build hypersonic weapons that break out the missile defense radar and open up a portal. And again, the Glenn Kent report is the starting point. So you have to talk about not an ideal adversary, but a reactive adversary. And the trend for the last 15 years has been that the offense always has the advantage. In terms of cost, in terms of relative gains, missile defense is still trailing. It may change. I will not say that it can never be done. I don't think we are there.
Thank you. Harold.
Thanks. Harold Tricunis, Deputy Director here at CSAC. Yeah, great presentation, frightening, as Rose said. I can completely see the role that heterogeneity in networks is doing theoretically for your argument. It's less clear to me how the self-organizing criticality part plays out. And that maybe I missed something. Is that sort of what you're doing with the input-output models?
No,
or what role does it then play within your paper?
Yeah. So one could imagine, well, if it's heterogeneous, we can make it homogeneous, right? So the point I'm trying to make with self-organized criticality, you're right, I didn't make it very clear, is this is not a idiosyncrasy of the American system. The self-organized criticality is across states, across economies, And it's actually across phenomena. I mean, it's people have, the early studies on self-organized criticality was the validation, empirical validation was tectonic plates. So what I'm trying to say with self-organized criticality is you can't get out of that self-organized criticality structure without imposing a huge cost. And we don't have the motivation to do it. So one can say, yeah.
You can assume that you're going to extend this to other states. So just as
Yeah.
the 26.2 megatonnes to destroy the United States, the number is quite low for Russia and China and so on and so forth. So it actually, I may push back even more strongly. I mean, what does this mean for the nuclear modernization effort? What good is it going to do if you already can do so much with what you have? Is that one of the implications of the paper?
Good question. I haven't thought of it. It should be. Now you just put the idea in my head. It should be, right? And I have to balance that with the bureaucracy argument. Right? So, but yes, I mean, and what do we modernize? If this is in fact the threshold I am claiming, then I need to be able to say what do we modernize, what not. I mean, should we modernize our early warning systems? Good question. I didn't pull that thread, but that is a thread worth pulling.
All right, gentleman behind you, and please step up so the microphones can hear you. There you go.
If you can't hear me, let me know.
It's the online. It's for the online.
It's for the online.
Yeah. Okay, I'm speaking online.
And
Damon
please
Flynn,
introduce yourself. Sorry.
again. But hi, Major Peter Lind, Air Force officer and defense fellow here. Just had a quick question for you and kind of a follow on to Harold's. Based on the low numbers that you have up there, what does your model mean for the nuclear triad, and the preferences or weaknesses for different ways that a state could employ weapons? So particularly, I'd like to know your opinion on that, like tactical employment. So making more lower yield, maybe not from a submarine or a ballistic missile.
Okay. So you will probably pick up when you probably read my. I was assiduously trying to avoid arsenal sizing, right? Because it does become a different analysis. Right? So 26.2 is what the Russians need to deliver. It's not what they need to actually get the 26.2, because they have to then go back and see, well, does the US have a missile defense, right? Are submarines more vulnerable? Do we need to go? So I did not do that analysis. So I will be very careful in saying anything on that regard, because that is a separate analysis. 26.2 is what you need to do a shield destruction. You may need 100 megatons to actually do it, or you may need 200, depending on your risk level, depending on your vulnerability. So that analysis is separate. But I will.
But you don't think your model would give one a benefit over another? Like, what do you think your model says about employment? Because if I'm quote you, the 26 number basically doesn't matter how you get it, you just have to get 26 is what your model says. But in your research, does that model suggest that one might be preferential over another?
So my model did not try and answer that question. I said, what is the baseline needed? So for North Korea, the question would be very different, right? I mean, this is true for the North Koreans too, but they don't have subs. So they may have to think about mobile missiles and stuff like that. And then that becomes the question, how reliable are the mobile missiles? So we need to do a two-player analysis on that. I did not do it, and I explicitly chose not to do it. So I am not arsenal sizing. I'm saying as long as you can get 26.2 to the other side, the job is done. Now, one could say it's 4 times, one could say it's 5 times, still the numbers are low. That is pretty much the point I'm getting at. So it's a great question. And how does one state, depending on its technological capability and vulnerability, decide how to get to the 26.2? I think that's a great question. My analysis is not doing that. And I think that's a scope condition we should be very careful in stating.
Thank you. Jim Goldgeier.
Great. Yeah. Hi, Jim Goldgeier, research affiliate here at CSAC. And thanks for the talk. Just one short comment and then my question. The short comment is, I feel like identifying a specific number like 26.2 undermines the credibility of. I looked at that and thought, wait, come on. I mean, told me 25 to 30, I would have been like, oh, I'm interesting. But you tell me that specific, I feel like really if I had 26, I wouldn't be enough. I'd have to have 26.2. That's my comment. The question is, and I guess it's related, is, do we really need assured destruction in order to deter nuclear use? And I mean, we have real world examples where assured destruction isn't needed. We're deterred from attacking North Korea. They don't have assured destruction capability, but we don't know what would happen. JFK didn't strike Cuba because he couldn't be assured that they would get all of them. And he said if one got through, that was one too many. So I just question whether we really require assured destruction in order to deter.
That question. My collaborator in all this effort is Steve Fett. So he and I are going back and forth, and he essentially kind of argues the way you do. We can go lower, right? I mean, you don't have to do all of this. The way I frame this paper is to see, is nuclear revolution theory still relevant? So the framing did the work for me. And to say nuclear revolution theory is relevant, it's not undermined by other technologies, is to then have to demonstrate that assured destruction, whatever that is still possible. And then I had to go to the McNamara criteria. So I still think it's a ceiling. I'm not saying it is the floor, but because I framed this paper as we have been having this discussion, the contemporary discussion on technology and the relevance and claims about irrelevance, and I come back and say, no, it still works.
Right. So you don't need more than that, right?
You need any. That is my claim in the paper, the introduction.
Yeah, that's good.
And the number point is very good. I'm glad you said that. I have to go back and so I have it really 23 wouldn't do the job. Yes, it would. So it's a good point. I need to not get caught up on that. I did the math. I had a number. It's just a number. Slight variations should not change it. So I will reframe that. Thank you for that.
Tracy Wilson asks online, have you examined the results of war games and simulations to inform your analysis? Have you done any look at wargaming to inform your data on nuclear weapons, megaton exchanges, and how each side might try to maintain escalation dominance? Was that, I know you said you focused on a kind of one-sided analysis, so, but did you touch on war games at all?
The honest answer is no, all right, because again, I was trying to get empirical bearing on this. So there was one exception though, and it was this fantastic book that's undercited, and it's also from a CSAC colleague. He has now moved into a survey methodology and public surveying. I'm missing the name. I can't. Anyway, so there is one book that was done in the 90s that kind of went to decision makers across the spectrum and said, oh, you want to do war fighting and war termination, but what is war termination? Okay, so assured destruction said, I have been very careful in my writing not to engage recovery, right? I'm saying recovery doesn't matter. Okay, you recover after 3 years, but you still don't want to take this hit. And then there is a huge debate in the Cold War about recovery and counter recovery, right? And this book does a fantastic job of saying, well, tell me what recovery is, right? I mean, I just killed, I don't know, the cities who take out 20 million people, recovering to what? And then people scratch their heads and going, well, we haven't thought about it. And it is a very good book. So that was one reference point that I was thinking through all of this on what is the scope, how do I tightly frame my theory? But I haven't looked at wargaming, I have done it. That could be stage 2. How would people react to these numbers? And in different scenarios, if only Carnegie would give me $1 million, that job will be done. But
we all have that feeling.
It's a good question. What does this mean when people get these numbers? How do they react?
Yeah,
I'd like to know.
Yeah, exactly. Please introduce yourself.
I'm sorry, my bad. I had the same question as Anna, so I think you really answered that, which is sort of what are the actual political or policy implications of your argument? And then to Harold's point, it helped that you specified how this self-organized criticality is really what explains why changing heterogeneity doesn't really matter.
Okay. Yes, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Emily Tallow. I'm a CSAC postdoc. My question is about whose mind are you trying to change, or who do you think would be most surprised by or convinced by, persuaded to believe something they did not already believe by seeing this exercise? To me, I'm thinking about this in terms of both the academics and the policymakers themselves. you're saying, well, bureaucrats always want more. Okay, well, if bureaucrats always want more, then this is an exercise
Mhm.
that is just purely theoretical.
Mhm.
And academically, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. This seems more like a policy relevant question to me than an academic exercise. And I'm wondering, I guess, first of all, are there academic questions you think this answers beyond like, is the nuclear revolution still relevant?
Mhm.
And also like who else would be convinced or persuaded to believe something otherwise they would not believe?
So academically, I think we are at the center of this debate. And again, I don't want to put names out here. But we are in the debate about arguments that are saying the technology is so good, the missile question is so good, we can do counterforce. Disarming first strike is a possibility. The nuclear revolution theory does not exist. There are recent publications across the spectrum on those. And I am saying that is not true. So there is, in fact, a debate, right, that is the revolution theory is still important? I say it is. And folks have said it's not. So academically, I think those are the people I want to engage with. People who are saying the theory doesn't apply anymore because counterforce is so good, or we can do damage limitation. Now, will I change their mind? I mean, that's very ambitious, but I would like to have a debate. Policy-wise, it gets interesting. So I will try and, in fact, I may have a presentation very similar to this at NTI in a month, and there may be other folks from the policy world. What I would like to have done is, at least in their mind, raise a question about, do we need all of this, right? Bureaucracies want more, but in my story, McNamara also got the numbers down. In fact, there's this nice book called How Much is Enough from Rand. And at one point, that book talks about somebody in the Air Force want 14,000 or 12,000, not 1,400. And McNamara got it to 1,000. So policy relevance is certainly there. And theoretically, I think it is. I mean, I'd be very interested in how liberal press react to my work.
But can I just ask one follow-up? Your question is, you've said that you haven't engaged on the question of employment at all. And the counterforce guys are talking about employment. So I guess I'm just curious, is there your theory or your estimate is based on specific kinds of targeting, correct? And counterforce targeting may be different. And you're saying, okay, well, it doesn't matter because you have to get to the number. But we're talking about different kinds of targets, different kinds of things. I'm kind of a little confused about how you can skirt the question of employment when you are explicitly trying to argue with people who are explicitly talking about employment.
Well, the counterforce people would say, I'm going to take out their ICBMs so much that I could go below the assured destruction threshold, and I can say, don't go any further. I'm saying you can't do counterforce to go below the assured destruction threshold because the threshold itself is so low.
But your target set embraces war supporting industries.
It does. Yeah, because in a second strike, it is going to be war supporting. It's going to be industrial targeting. It's not even war supporting. It's just
that's what we call it.
It's pulling back the economic infrastructure. Yeah.
Did you have a two-finger on this?
So I mean, I think Emily has it right. I think it builds on Jim's point, which I think is right now. I think the paper is not necessarily going full force on sort of the on press and Lieber, essentially, right? Where the whole argument here is that if one sub is able to get away, that's enough to wipe out American national power, right? And so like that is getting to Emily's point, right? Like, or even if you manage to wipe out every single ICBM on the Chinese mainland, it wouldn't matter if one sub gets it. So like I think that is sort of like the real point that needs to be driven a lot further, where it's like, you have to be 100% precise, otherwise it's still massive destruction. So like I think that's sort of the real thrust here.
I have no debate with that.
Very good. Well, let's wrap up with a question that Paul Slovak asks. And we've been talking about it in various ways, but he says, your analysis informs targeting. What does it mean for deterrence? Does it tempt Putin more? Or, in other words, now Putin knows how better to attack us, or is he still threatened existentially?
So Putin is threatened existentially. We do have the capacity. And so after I sent you guys the draft, this is work in progress, and then I went back and I made some more notes. And I think I have a note that says we know, they know that we know that they know, and I have to work it out. So both sides know that this is the threshold and they're equally vulnerable. Now the nuclear revolution, the MAD 4 version that Jervis puts out does not preclude that countries will challenge each other on the periphery. So I'm not saying the world is going to eventually be peaceful. That is one version of MAD, but that's not the version I'm talking about. So Putin would be cautious as much as we have been cautious. I think we will not push beyond a certain threshold and challenge core interest, which is what the nuclear revolution theory is. The problem here is what is core interest, right? And how willing are you to go slowly up the risk escalation ladder? So we are debating all of that. But I think that risk perception is being reinforced. It's not lost. That is the argument I'm trying to make, that we'd be very worried that we would get to a stage that suddenly it spikes the risk level so high that it would lead to a strategic exchange, and that would constrain each of the parties. I think that's being reinforced.
Well, thank you. On that note, that was an excellent discussion. Thank you all, and online to everyone who participated so actively. And please join me in thanking Jay for his presentation.